Where's Johnny? You're gonna need a bigger boat. Wow, so serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Chasing the Gold. I'm Shadan Larkey. I'm here with film critic Nick Spake. We have a fun episode getting into all things BAFTA, SAG predictions, and then we'll kind of end by doing a state of the race and talk about where things are 2 weeks before the Oscars. But before we start, Nick, I'm really happy to meet you. I'm really happy you're here. I wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about you. I think one of my favorite things about this podcast is kind of getting to know and interview my fellow and favorite film critics. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into film, how you got into the Oscar race. I know you have a book coming out, so I want to learn about all of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And, I've been into the Oscars as far back as I can remember, although I really started making predictions around the same time that they introduced the Best Animated Feature category. And that was actually one of the inspirations I had to write the book I have coming out. It's called Bright and Shiny, A History of Animation at Award Shows. And even though it chronicles everything from the original Best Animated Short Oscar to The Boy and Huron winning, and it's not just the Oscars either. It covers animation at the Emmys and Annie Awards too. Of course, I do more than just, cover animation. At flickreel.com, I talk about film, where I do my regular reviews. And I'm also a regular writer at watchamojo.com, where I not only write about film, but, pretty much everything that you can make a top 10 list out of.
I love a good top 10 list. What was maybe like the animated movie that sort of sparked your interest in that, to be so passionate about animation? Not rightfully so, but I'm just curious, was there like something in your childhood? Was it the sort of artistry? Was it more like, beginning in art? And how did that lead you to your love of animation?
Yeah, well, I think Roger Ebert best summed it up when he said that when I was a child, that animation looked more real to me than live action. And I've always had that mentality. And I feel that you can really do more with animation than live action ever could. And I really want to see the medium represented more. Like this year alone, we're doing a little better. It was great to see Flow, an international feature, and Wild Robot got more than one nomination, but both of those films were worthy of Best Picture nominations. And quite frankly, some are better than the ones that got in, but hopefully we're going to see a changing of the tide sooner than later.
Well, speaking of it, is there a film that you loved from this year, an animated film that wasn't nominated, that you think is worthy of consideration, or just people still checking out?
Yeah, absolutely. One that didn't get in there was Chicken for Linda. It's an international film, and it didn't get as much press, but it's from G Kids, and it's a real charming mother and daughter story. And even though it's technically getting a wider release this year, it was eligible for awards consideration this year, The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie. And it's pretty much everything you could want from a Looney Tunes movie and more.
Cool. Well, let me ask you, what are your thoughts on this award season in general? I mean, I keep saying every episode is kind of one of the most chaotic and interesting, certainly. But how are you feeling, like kind of a temperature check of what's been going on and your read on this year?
Yeah, it's chaotic in more ways than one, not just because of some of the, baggage that some of the contenders have had, like Amelia Perez, but just, trying to predict exactly what the front runner is. Like at this point last year, I think we all knew that Oppenheimer pretty much had it in the bag, and the same could be said about a lot of other categories. The only one that was really up in the air was Best Actress, and that's very much the case this year, but this year there are several other categories like Best Actress, where it could go one of two ways or one of three ways. And the BAFTAs has only made it more chaotic, I think.
Yeah. So before we got on, I was actually updating my Oscar predictions on InSessionFilm.com. You can see all of those there, but I was kind of going through and making a list of all the categories that I feel like are still a little bit up in the air. We can end by going over those, but I feel like there's more than I would like at this point. Although I don't know, again, as a viewer, I think that makes it more fun. As a predictor who wants to be right, I think we kind of like to feel more confidence at this point. But it's good to know you're on the same page, and I'm not,
Yeah, that's
going on
exactly
a
how
limb.
I.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say there's probably about 10 categories that I'm very much on the fence about, and I do
10.
feel. Yeah, at least 10, where I could see it going one of two ways. I still think that like some are closer than others. Some I feel pretty good about, but if I could get 15 out of 24 categories this year, it wouldn't be great, but it wouldn't be, entirely unexpected.
Well, Nick, save that list of 10 for me. That's going to be a great way to sort of end our show. But let's start about talking about SAG because that's our last sort of award show that we have before the Oscars. We've already had BAFTA, we've had WGA, the Directors Guild, the Producers Guild. So SAG is sort of our last remaining hurdle. So one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on today is just to talk about our predictions and how we think that the show is going to play out.
Yeah. Well, is there a particular category that you want to start with, or should we just dive in?
Dive in. Why not?
Yeah. Well, I do think that there are about three races where I think that we have, pretty locked in winners. But we could see a few things, shaken up at SAG. Like in Best Supporting Actor, I think we all agree that Kieran Culkin is going to, probably steamroll his way through this season. He's pretty much done so already. Although, if anyone is going to, give him a run for his money, it could be Edward Norton because he does have an
Mhm.
overdue factor going for him, and the SAGs, they sometimes like to award veterans, and he's definitely the veteran in the category. But at this point, I don't really see anyone beating Culkin. Like, it would be a fun surprise to see Jonathan Bailey upset there, but I think we can all agree that he's kind of just lucky to be in that crowd, and maybe he'll get in next time for Wicked for Good. And if they end up really loving Yuri Borisov, then who knows? Maybe they could give Honor some love, but I'm pretty secure with Culkin winning here.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the same can be said about Zoe Saldana. Even with all the bad press Amelia Perez has been getting, she's kind of proven with the BAFTAs that she can overcome any bad publicity that the film's been getting. And she's also going to probably be another sweeper for the season. Now, if Ariana Grande were to win anywhere this season, SAG would make the most sense considering how well that, Wicked did in terms of nominations. And a lot of people have been waiting for Ariana just to win somewhere, but she didn't win at the Globe. She didn't win at Critics' Choice, and I feel like it would have been easy for her to win there too. So at this point, I also think that Zoe Saldana is gonna just, go and just sweep every single last one this year.
Yeah, and I want to mention before we dive deeper into SAG that the SAG Awards are going to be Sunday, February 23rd. They're streaming on Netflix, and that's going to start at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time. So they're going to be on this Sunday, February 23rd for my fellow awards junkies that want to watch. But I agree with you, Nick. I think in the supporting categories, we're just going to see a sweep. I feel like if there was any time for a break in momentum, we would have seen it by now. And I think BAFTA was particularly telling for Zoe Saldana. I felt like if there was going to be a kind of a stop for her, it was going to be at BAFTA. But seeing her win there kind of sealed the deal for me that our supporting categories, I think, are just going to be full sweeps all the way down the line.
Yeah. Now, in the lead acting categories, I think that's where things can get a little more interesting, at least at SAG. Adrian Brody, he's pretty firmly the front runner. And I do think that if he loses anywhere, it would be at SAG, considering that
Mhm.
in Complete Unknown, it was the second most nominated movie this year. People love Timothy Chalamet, and it's going to be weird if he goes this entire season without winning anything, but that just might be the way it falls. I do think that he has a decent chance at winning at SAG, but I do think that would be his only win for the season. If he were to go on to win the Oscar, he would ironically, beat Adrian Brody as the youngest person who ever won in Best Actor. But at this point, I think that, whether Brody wins or loses at SAG, he's pretty safe to go the distance.
I agree with you. That's funny you mentioned that. That was going to be my question is if we do see an upset at SAG, do you think that that's going to affect Brody's chances overall? But I think he's going to take SAG, and I think even if he doesn't, he's still taking the Oscar. I think the second Oscar is safe, and I think his stat, he can keep his stat as the youngest Best Actor winner alive for a little bit longer.
Yeah. And one other thing that Chalamet has going for him at SAG, they clearly didn't like Brutalist as much because Guy Pearce shockingly didn't get into Best Supporting Actor at SAG, and it didn't get into Ensemble. They didn't hate the film outright, and I think that the strength of Brody's performance is enough to, maybe get him SAG too, but I don't think it's going to matter as much if he loses at
Hmm.
SAG.
I think you're right. Let's talk about the acting category that we can all agree is the most up in the air, given that Mikey Madison just won at BAFTA for Anora. I've seen plenty of fellow Oscar watchers are switching from Madison for more to Madison. I am not ready to make that switch. I've not made the switch yet. I'm very much waiting for SAG to see what they do. This is such a fascinating race because I can see a lot of parallels to other years. Frances McDormand winning for Nomadland when Nomadland was winning Best Picture, so I could see Madison going that route. Famously, we sort of had the Glenn Close where everyone thought she was finally winning her overdue Oscar, and then Olivia Colman wins at BAFTA and goes on to win the Oscar. But it's hard because yes, The Substance is probably not going to win Best Picture, obviously, but it's still a film that has more support than something like The Wife, for example. And I think Demi, I can see again a more American voting body, want to support her and want to give her that overdue win. And given that they do like The Substance, I mean, it has all the key nominations it needs. It has the screenplay, director. It's nominated in Best Picture, so there is support for the film. So that's why I feel like I'm not ready to let go of Demi Moore, even though it is a genre. I understand all the arguments against her. They've been here all season long. It's a genre film. Mikey Madison, she's probably going to be in the Best Picture winner. She's kind of this ingenue. She was our early front runner for Best Actress, but I think SAG, especially, I can see Demi, winning there. People have worked with her. It's a much more populist voting body. You have a lot of people who are, radio DJs from Middle America. They're probably more likely to vote for Demi Moore over somebody like Mikey Madison. We should mention, obviously we're recording today on February 18th. Oscar voting closes today, so it's not really SAG and who wins there isn't really going to impact what's going to happen at the Oscars. But I think if Demi Moore wins, it's going to show that she does have support, and maybe just BAFTA is going to BAFTA. I don't know. What do you think about Best Actress?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, especially the parallels you made to Glenn Close and Olivia Colman. Another race that kind of reminds me of is when Julia Christie lost to Marion Cotillard for La Vie en Rose. At the time, Christie was winning everything except for BAFTA, where Cotillard won, and lo and behold, she went on to win the Oscar. Now, they're both kind of different races in some respects, because even though that Christie and Moore are both like veterans, Christie had an Oscar, so there wasn't as much of an urgency to give her another one. And I do think that you could actually also draw parallels between Moore and some of the best actor races and supporting actor races we've seen, because we've seen a lot of comebacks in those categories. Like Mickey Rourke, for one example, with The Wrestler. He had a great narrative. Everyone thought he was going to win based on that narrative alone, along with the quality of his performance. And then in the end, Sean Penn won. Then you could also argue that there was kind of a parallel with with Burt Reynolds when he was getting a lot of traction for Boogie Nights. A lot of people thought he would win after he won the Golden Globe. Then it went to Robin Williams. So they like a comeback, but they don't always necessarily go for the comeback kid. Now, one recent example that could that also, draws parallels to this is when Brendan Fraser won for The Whale. He was going up against Austin Butler for this really transformative performance. Everyone saw this
Mm-hmm.
as like, his coronation into Hollywood. A lot of people thought that Austin Butler could win, but in the end, they went with Brendan Fraser, who, was long overdue. And for the longest time, people said he was more of a popcorn actor, but not a serious actor. But then he showed people, just why he is so talented. And he also won over people with speeches, just giving these amazing speeches, just like Demi Moore has done. So that could very well carry her to a win. What gives me pause is that if Honora really is the best picture front runner, and if it does ultimately win, it just doesn't make a ton of sense for Mikey Madison to get left behind. I mean, you could also, draw comparison to the year that Birdman won without Michael Keaton, but if you think about it, Demi Moore has more in common with Michael Keaton than, Mikey Madison, because both were veterans, both were overdue, both were on their first nominations. And in the end, they went with the younger person who had the more transformative performance. And I wouldn't say that Mikey has the more transformative performance in this case, but she is, the new person on the block who has been charming a lot of people, much like Eddie Redmayne has.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in turn, yeah.
Go
Now, as
ahead. Go
far
ahead.
as I'm sorry. Now, as far as SAG goes, I do think that Demi Moore will likely win at SAG because they do sometimes have a tendency to favor the veteran actors at SAG, much like how Glenn Close won at SAG. But I do think that at the Oscars, I am feeling more and more like Mikey Madison might win. That's not my final prediction for right now, but as far as SAG go, I do think that Demi Moore is going to win there and keep this race interesting.
Yeah, no, like I said, I'm not ready to make a final prediction. I do think Mikey Madison is like a strong, I mean, she is right on the heels of Moore, like I think Demi Moore is in trouble. If she was sort of writing that Oscar speech and planning maybe she might, I mean, she should still write a speech, but you know what I mean? She's not anywhere near the lock that maybe we were thinking she could be post Globes, right? But yeah, I see both scenarios. So because one thing to think about is I think hair and makeup for The Substance is very much locked in at this point, and I can't let go of the idea of maybe doing like a actress, hair and makeup pairing. I think that also makes sense. And again, I think The Substance is a movie that is beloved in its own way. Probably not, obviously not as much as Anora, but Anora also probably, had more place, like, the supporting actor that they were able to get in, and Margaret Qualley was not able to get in. So I don't know. I'm like I said, I'm just struggling of like letting go of Demi because I can see, like you said, there's plenty of veterans that were able to send us surpass their younger counterparts. But if Anora is steaming its way to picture, I don't know. I'm very up in the air about this category. But, I agree with you, kind of like we were talking about with Best Actor. Even if Demi does win SAG, I don't think that means that she has it locked up by any means. And vice versa. If Mikey Madison were to win, I still think there's a scenario that Demi could still eke it out. Now, it would be much less likely. I think if Madison does win at SAG, then that clearly shows like a very strong base of support that shouldn't be underestimated. But yeah, I think this race is probably one of the biggest nail biters, and I don't think SAG is going to lock anything up necessarily.
Yeah, especially since Fernanda Torres isn't even nominated at SAG, and she can still very well go on to win the Oscar if they do really love I'm Still Here. She's still probably in third in that race, but just look out for her going into the Oscars still.
Yeah, I would say she's definitely solidly in third place. I just feel like unless there's a scenario where somehow Moore and Madison split their support, I feel like she is just, solidly in third place. Another interesting race, you're kind of mentioning races of the past. I was thinking about Jennifer Lawrence and Emmanuel Riva. Emmanuel Riva did go, win BAFTA before. Now, granted, she was not in a sort of juggernaut like a Nora, but we have seen cases of sort of BAFTA going their own way and then Oscar sort of quote unquote, course correcting back to their sort of beloved American figures. But in this case, it's hard because they're both sort of in these American films that have very strong narratives. I mean, Anora, one of the reasons why early on in the race it was very much considered the front runner was because it does have a strong message. It does feel like a film of the moment, and The Substance does too. I think they're both incredibly relevant. They both have really strong sort of ties and overarching narratives. Like I said, this category, earlier, in terms of the nominations, Nick, I don't know for you, but Best Supporting Actress was the one for me where I was really struggling to figure out the 5, and I ultimately only got 3 out of the 5. But I think going into the Oscars, this is probably the biggest kind of nail biter for me of where it's going to go.
Yeah, same here for supporting actress. I drank the Jamie Lee Curtis Kool-Aid after SAG, and
I
I
did
came to
too. I did too. I'm right there with you. Yeah.
yeah. I will like to see her at the SAG, though. I want to see her on the red carpet at the very least. least.
Yeah, and it's hard. I feel like we've all, I'll speak for myself, like grown attached to like Demi Moore and the idea of her winning. And so it would kind of be sad for me to not kind of see that come through for her. I would be really disappointed. But even if I guess that doesn't happen for her, at least in the supporting, I mean, in the actress race, we've had, Fernanda won the Golden Globe, which was great for her. Mikey Madison had a BAFTA moment, and then Demi, had Globes and Critics' Choice. So everyone got something. Whereas in something like the Best Actor race, I would have actually really liked to see, Timothy potentially win the Globe, or maybe, my beloved Coleman Domingo win something. Like I would have liked to see more spreading of the wealth. And then I mean, I think again we're gonna see a sweep in the supporting races. So it would be nice to see more spreading of the wealth. But I would be really, really disappointed if Moore doesn't ultimately win the Oscar, especially because we keep calling it. I myself keep calling it, the comeback narrative, but it's just a really good performance. Like it's just she's fantastic, and Mikey Madison is fantastic. Fernando Torres is fantastic. Like if that race went any of those three ways, I would definitely not be disappointed.
Yeah, definitely. And Mikey Madison, she gave my favorite performance of the past year, so I can't be disappointed if she wins. But it's gonna be hard not to root for more going into that ceremony, especially considering how far she came. It feels like only like 3 months ago we were thinking to ourselves, let's hope that they don't snub the substance in like best makeup because that even
Right.
felt like a possibility. And no one was really taking it that seriously that it would break into all these other above the line categories. And when it did, it really felt like, a glass ceiling had been broken for horror, even though you could actually compare Matt Moore's performance to Natalie Portman in Black Swan over it 10 years ago, which also had, kind of a disturbing transformation to it, and also incorporated elements of body horror. Not as much of the substance, but I guess you could say that movie walked so the substance could run at the Oscars.
That's actually a great comparison because, Black Swan had, it was horror, but it was sort of very prestige. I mean, you had Aronofsky and you had sort of this idea that it was elevated horror. And I think the substance has very much achieved that same sort of cachet for itself. So yeah, that's a fascinating comparison.
Yeah. And even if you look
So
at
let
last year's,
hmm no,
yeah,
go ahead, please.
even if you look at last year's Best Actress race, Poor Things isn't a horror movie, but Emma Stone is basically playing a Bride of Frankenstein-like character. So it's not that much of a stretch to see the Academy going from Bella Baxter to Demi Moore in The Substance.
No, I think that's a fantastic point. And yeah, I mean, we keep talking about an academy that's younger and younger, and in some ways, I can see that benefiting both Moore and Madison because I can see them wanting to award and embrace something like the substance that's more interesting. Like again, we've seen the Everything Everywhere All at Once in Best Picture, so I can see them embracing the substance more than an academy of maybe 10 to 20 years ago. But then perhaps a younger, more diverse voting body would be drawn to a performance like the one that Madison gives in Honora. Sort of this, I don't know how to describe, like this, there's the electricity in that film that I think is rightfully capturing a lot of people and I think would appeal to this sort of voting body.
Yeah, another thing that gives me pause about Moore winning the Oscar is that even though she's very clearly the lead in that movie, she does split a lot of her screen time with Margot Robbie. And they didn't really respect the balance by nominating both of them, but it really feels like they should have because the movie wouldn't have worked without both of them. Whereas with the Nora, that movie basically belongs to Mikey Madison. There are other great performances in it, and it's well cast across the board. But if you didn't have her in that role, it wouldn't be nearly as strong. So I almost feel like I don't know if screen time is going to equal, the most votes, but if it does, I think that will work in Madison's favor.
No, she's very much, I mean, she's in every frame, I think, and she just lights up the screen and yeah. And I mean, they do really love the arrival of a new star and to sort of award that. So yeah, I don't know. I think it'll be I'll have to decide post SAG. And yeah, Nick, that was my in supporting actors for my predictions. I was like, they're gonna, if they love The Substance, they have to nominate Margaret Qualley, and they didn't. So that was the other rabbit hole. I went down the Jamie Lee Curtis rabbit hole, and I went down the Margaret Qualley rabbit hole, and I couldn't let it go. Let's talk about best ensemble cast. So we have A Complete Unknown, Nora, Conclave, Amelia Perez, and Wicked as our 5. And it's interesting because, since the merger with BAFTA, SAG has become much less predictive overall and has become much more populist, and sort of awarding, something like Black Panther. And so I wonder, like, A, is it going to be as predictive? And B, I'm so tempted to just say it's going to be Wicked, because Wicked vastly overperformed. You mentioned the fantastic nomination for Jonathan Bailey. And I think they just like the more popular films. I mean, we saw Wicked do really well. It obviously won the big prize at Critics' Choice. So I wonder, like, are we going to see a repeat of that here?
Yeah, and from the beginning, I was predicting Wicked because, like you said, SAG has gone more populist, as of late. And if Black Panther could win there, I could definitely see Wicked winning there too. And Wicked hasn't won as much as people might like, and this would be the year, this would be the place to honor it, especially if it would give Cynthia and Ariana, just a place to finally, be, awarded. What started to give me pause is when Honora finally started winning all these awards. It swept all the guilds, and it hasn't won this one yet. If it does, then I think it's going to be pretty unstoppable to win the Oscar because it'll join American Beauty, No Country for Old Men, Slumdog Millionaire, Argo, and Everything Everywhere as one of the films that won all 4. Now, if it doesn't win at SAG, then it could very well go the vote for the Brokeback Mountain route, and then something like Conclave comes up and wins the Oscar. Now, at BAFTA, they went with Honora in Best Casting, which some people might see that as a sign that it can win SAG. Although, since BAFTA introduced that category just a few years ago, it hasn't lined up. It's still a pretty new category at BAFTA, so I don't know if you really want to look at there for your indicator, but if it says anything, it's that Honora might be vulnerable there. And, Conclave won at, CCA for casting, so who's to say that it won't, win ensemble at SAG too? And considering that Conclave also won Best Picture at BAFTA, so it would be a sign that it's actually the front runner to win Best Picture at the Oscars. Now, I am leaning more towards Honora though, because as of right now, I am predicting it to win Best Picture at the Oscars. And the last time that a Best Picture Oscar, there was an Oscar winner that didn't win SAG or Globe, it was The Hurt Locker. Like that didn't win any Globes, didn't win at SAG, but still managed to go on to win the Oscar. So I think that it can happen, but I do think that Honora could very well cement its place as the front runner by winning SAG for Best Ensemble. Although your Wicked argument is very tempting, and for all I know, I will change at the 11th hour. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and stick with Honora.
Well, let's talk about Conclave for a second. As you mentioned, it did very well at BAFTA, winning Best Film at BAFTA, and that could just be a British thing. I can see that argument for sure. But if we look at, there's a lot of, you've got John Lithgow, you've got Stanley Tucci, Ralph Fiennes. Like a lot of very beloved actors, a lot of veterans that, I could see people wanting, get up on that stage and see, give a speech. And if Wicked is maybe too campy or not, I don't know, prestige enough, I could see like a lot of voters voting for Conclave. It's about to surpass $100 million. People have seen it. It's done extremely well. So I don't know. I think that that's a very strong possibility here. And I don't know if that would be enough for me to say it's winning picture. I think Honora winning at PGA on a preferential ballot was enough for me to say it's winning picture. But I think Conclave could, I could see it winning at SAG. That wouldn't surprise me. I think at this point, I'm pretty evenly split between Wicked, Conclave, and Honora. I think if we're going based on stats and the idea that it's the front runner for picture, sure. But just based on the history of SAG and their love of vets, their love of actors, knowing that, again, they vote for things that they have seen. I could see Conclave. I mean, it's been all over it's been memed to death. It's been all over the internet. So even if you haven't seen it, you've certainly heard of it. And I just wonder how much I know Honora has been seen by the right people. So maybe the argument, that argument doesn't fly, sure. But I just wonder when you're up against these two huge juggernauts, if that's going to make a difference. Because when the SAG nominations came out, I thought Amelia Perez, I thought for sure was just going to win SAG Ensemble, whether it was going to win picture or not, because of the Netflix factor, because it's so easily accessible. So I wonder, like, if you were Amelia Perez voter and you decided, I'm not going to vote for this after everything that's happened, where does your vote go? Does it go to another musical? Does it go to something like Honora? I don't know. I wonder about that. I wonder how big of a factor those late switching voters, how if that's gonna be enough to sway anything.
Yeah, and if it does go to Amelia Perez, then I think that's the ultimate sign that I don't think that Amelia Perez is going to win Best Picture at the Oscars, but I do think it's a sign that it would probably be safe to win Best International Feature at the Oscars. Because as of right now, there's still a slight possibility that I'm Still Here could win there, but if Amelia Perez wins anything major outside of supporting actress at SAG, it's a sign that, they just don't care about the controversy that much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only one I
Yeah.
really don't think has much of a chance of winning SAG Ensemble is The Complete Unknown, even though it was
Mhm.
the second most nominated film. It just feels like a film that a lot of people love, but not quite enough to give it any of the top prizes this year. Although
Mhm.
Chalamet again isn't out of the question.
Yeah, and SAG also does stunt ensemble, and Wicked is nominated there. So I wonder if giving Wicked a win there, even though it's not, I mean, something like Deadpool and Wolverine or The Fall Guy is a much better way to honor stuntmen. Literally, The Fall Guy is made to honor stuntmen and women. But I wonder if giving the Wicked team a win there and would be enough of a we gave Wicked something, let's move on. Um, to your point earlier, I do think Zoe Saldana is very safe, but it wouldn't be completely out of the realm of possibility for Ariana Grande to win. Uh, Again, we have to remember that after merger, it's not just actors anymore. It's again, radio DJs, it's news anchors, it's people from all over America that are getting a chance to vote, and I can just see them perhaps more likely to vote for a Wicked more so than an Amelia Perez in supporting actress or in um in ensemble. I don't know. I don't know. I think if this was SAG pre merger, absolutely. I would say, your Honora is safe. Our acting frontrunners are safe, but I just wonder how much is that gonna if somebody's just like, well, I haven't seen Honora and I've seen my conclave memes all over the place. Like, is that enough? I don't know. But it's given me pause. I actually think the main category, I don't know if you agree, Nick, but is the one that I'm most sort of unsure about.
Ensemble, yeah, that is the one I'm the most split on because an actress, I really think it comes down to two. And this one, it could go to the top three that we mentioned, and it wouldn't be surprising for any of them. And if Conclave
Mm-hmm.
does win the ensemble, as some people are predicting, then I do think that there is a pretty clear path for it to win the Oscar because at this point, it's definitely winning Best Adapted Screenplay. It can definitely win editing after winning at BAFTA. And that's basically your three to get to Best Picture. Now, if Honora wants to stay in the race, I don't think it has to win anything at SAG, but it would definitely cement it as the front runner.
That's definitely true. I think with Honora, it doesn't have to win anything at SAG. And as we mentioned, I mean, Oscar voting is going to be closed. So I don't think SAG, you can't say, oh, the speech is going to matter. It's not. It just may be indicative of where the actors are. And the actors are the largest block of the Academy. So if they are very clearly throw their support behind Honora, it's done. But even if Conclave or Wicked were to eke it out, I don't think that changes Honora winning Best Film. Shall we and we can definitely discuss SAG as we sort of go through the BAFTA winners, but I do want to kind of go through our list of winners as we've kind of been talking about through the episode, because I think we've gotten a lot of really fascinating winners, and they could potentially, Nick, provide us some clarity in the other races. For Best Film, as we mentioned, Conclave won there. Madison won, Mikey Madison for Best Actress, Adrian Brody for The Brutalist and Leading Actor, Zoe Saldana in Supporting Actress, Kieran Culkin in Supporting Actor. Director, I have to say, Brady Corbet winning was a shock to me, really and truly, because I would have thought if they were going to go outside of Sean Baker, it would have gone to Edward Berger, perhaps, but or Jacques Audiard, but Brady Corbet pulling out a win at BAFTA and not winning a DGA. How did you feel about that?
I was actually predicting Bradley to win at BAFTA because I still think that he is the best director frontrunner. Although that DGA win did really throw me for a loop, and it goes to show that this could be a lot like, when The King's Speech won in Best Director, even though it seemed like, David Fincher was very firmly in the position to win there. And even though I still think that The Brutalist is the more sweeping directorial achievement, by all accounts, it probably should be winning Best Director. But yeah, DGA just gives me such pause, but BAFTA has me back in the camp that Bradley can still win this thing.
I need to hear more about this. What's your argument for sticking with Brady Corbet here? Because I think the 9 out of 10 past DGA winners going on to win director at the Oscars is a strong stat in favor of Sean Baker. And Sean Baker is a very beloved American filmmaker. His films, have done really well in the past in the Oscars, at least with nominations in the past, and sort of getting his actors nominated. So I think he's pretty strongly, out front and for director at this point. What's your argument for sticking with Corbet?
Well, I considered, the DGA that too, and while that is very tempting, I just feel like more people are going to look at The Brutalist and say that's more of a directorial achievement. They've known how much, how it was made for so little and yet achieved so much. And I do think that they may want to award The Brutalist in a few categories outside of Best Actor. Like, I think that it's going to win score at this point, and I feel like if that, director would also be a natural fit for it too. And we also have to consider Sean Baker is nominated for 4 Academy Awards. If he were to win all 4, he would tie Walt Disney as the only person who's won 4 in a single night. And who knows, maybe he can do that, but I'm not confident that he's going to. So I'm just considering where exactly is he going to, possibly fall out. I think that Anora can still win Best Picture, and if it doesn't win there, I think that screenplay is probably the next best thing that it can also win. Now, after losing editing at SAG, I mean at BAFTA, that to Conclave, I think that's where it's probably the most vulnerable to lose an award. So I think that is where, Baker's going to falter and potentially, fall short of the record. And if he loses another, then I think that it could be Best Director, just because I do think that personally, this is probably just my personal bias getting ahead of me, but I do think that The Brutalist is the more significant achievement in that category. And Sean Baker, he also kind of reminds me a bit of Chloe Zhao when she was nominated for 4 Oscars, and everyone thought that she could win 4 in a night, and she ultimately didn't win all 4. She won only 2. And to be fair, one of them was for Best Director, one was for Best Picture. Although in this case, I think that if Baker only gets 2, it'll probably be Picture and Screenplay. But 3 isn't out of the question, and let's be honest, neither is 4.
I don't have Sean Baker winning all 4 of his nominations, although I agree with you, it's not out of the realm of possibility. We've seen sort of sweeps more and more in recent years, and films picking up a large number of Oscars on their way to Picture, which again favors Mikey Madison. But I think at this point, I'm going Picture for Anora, and then in terms of Baker, I think he's doing director and original screenplay. I think Conclave winning editing at BAFTA, I think it's going to win editing at the Oscars as well. And Baker will go 3 for 4 in terms of his nominations. But I don't, and I agree with you. I think I've all season long, I felt like director, actor just made sense to me, pairing those two together. And if Adrian Brody is sweeping, it just makes sense that he would take Corbet along for the ride. And I agree with you that it's a stronger, directorial achievement. I sort of mentioned it. It reminds me a lot of Damien Chazelle and sort of celebrating the arrival of a new American auteur on the scene. And obviously, Corbet's made other films, but I feel like this is really his introduction to a broader cinematic audience. So it makes sense to celebrate that. But I just feel like Sean Baker, it's kind of like Inarritu for Birdman, or sort of, I feel like the film is just going and he's just going to go along.
One other thing to consider, like we're talking a lot about Adrian Brody, and the last time, he was in the Oscar conversation was for The Pianist, where it was actually a surprise when Roman Polanski won that award for Best Director to go with Brody's Best Actor. Because at the time, a lot of people were thinking that it was going to be Martin Scorsese for Gangs of New York. Everyone thought he was overdue to finally win. Everyone loves Scorsese. It's time for him to win an Oscar for this epic. And if it's not Scorsese, then it'll probably be Rob Marshall for Chicago. And the Best Director race isn't as tight this year, I think, as it was back then, which is probably why Polanski was able to eke out a win. But it would be ironic if, Brody and director went together once again over 20 years later.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great race to compare it to. And given again the PGA win for Sean Baker, I think he's just really, they really admire the fact that he, edits his own films, does his casting, I think, and just he's kind of a one-man show. And so I think the admiration for him is there. And I think they've been waiting for his moment to arrive, and it's arrived. And yeah, I don't know, maybe if SAG were to somehow go a different way than Anora, then maybe I would be like, okay, if the support isn't there as much, or like let's say Demi wins at SAG, and I think, okay, well, if there's other support for these other films, but to me, I just feel like Anora is strong and Baker is strong, and I'm not ready to doubt that, at least in director. Which brings me to our next shot. Another real shocker of BAFTA for me was Jesse Eisenberg winning original screenplay over Coralie Farjat for The Substance and Sean Baker for Anora. And we should mention that WGA and Critics' Choice and now BAFTA have gone to 3 separate films. So original screenplay is kind of our most up in the air film here. Do we go with the, frontrunner, Oscar Best Picture frontrunner of the moment? I've had Sean Baker sort of locked into original screenplay for quite a while now. Do we go with The Substance, which is the most original, truly original screenplay of the year? And we've seen in recent years the original screenplay category has gone that way, right? I mean, The Promising Young Woman, Get Out, like they love these screenplays that are truly the most original films of the year. Or is A Real Pain? I saw, and I forgot who it was, forgive me. Somebody made an excellent argument that perhaps A Real Pain was in sort of the 11th position over Sing Sing for Best Picture, and perhaps there's a lot of love for A Real Pain that we're underestimating here.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a 3-horse race, and like you said, even though it wasn't nominated for Best Picture, that doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't beloved. Like, one good example is when Foxcatcher didn't get into Best Picture, but it managed to get into Best Director. You'd think that it would have gone into both, but it just goes to show that sometimes that just because something isn't in Best Picture doesn't mean it can't still win elsewhere. And ironically, going into the WGA Awards, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if A Real Pain could win here. And I almost predicted it there, but it was ultimately Anora. And I figured, well, then I guess that Anora is just going to sweep the season in that category. And then, lo and behold, at the BAFTA, it goes to A Real Pain. And that could be because, it's a European, voting body, and it is kind of, a Polish story to a certain extent. Yeah, but like you also said, The Substance, it's the most original film in this lineup. It could very well win here, like Get Out. And it could also be, a win for Coralie Farjat because she's probably not going to win Best Director at this point, and they sometimes like to award a director in one of those categories. And with Sean Baker, if he does win in Best Director or Best Editing, they may figure, let's spread the love. Like, I know they usually don't do that, but when you have someone that's in 4 different categories, they might be compelled to. Of course, even when they do, we don't know how different people might want to spread the love. which leads to those splitting.
So,
Now,
in terms of the Oscars, who's your number one right now?
right now, I still got Honora winning the Best
Mhm.
Original Screenplay because I think it's going to win Best Picture. It's going to win at least one other award to go with that because, the last movie just to win two Oscars, that one of which was Best Picture, was Spotlight, and before that was Grand Hotel. So even though it doesn't happen often, it can definitely happen. I feel more secure knowing that a film might win at least three Oscars, but two, at the very least, means that you're pretty on. Means that you can still pull it off. And if it doesn't win in best screenplay, then editing, actress, there are also possibilities. But I think best screenplay is probably its safest, and yet it's probably one of the closest races going into the
Yeah.
Oscars, which just goes to show how unpredictable this race has been.
Yeah. And you bring up an excellent point of, Nora needs a second sort of thing to go along with picture. But the thing that popped into my head was how fun it would be if Corbet won director, Moore won actress, and then Nora won picture and only picture. I don't think that's going to happen, but that would floor me and it would bring me so much joy because I want chaos and that would be the most chaotic ending I could imagine for the season.
Well, something like that already happened because at CCA, Honora was completely blanking all night. Everyone thought
Mhm.
that if Honora was going
Yeah.
to win anything, it would have been Best Actress, Best Screenplay at CCA. And when it lost those awards, we all figured, ah, man, Honora, it's not going to win anything this year. And then it wins Best Picture, its only major win of the night. And then that's when its sweep across various shows started happening. So who knows? Maybe it could just win in Best Picture at the Oscars, especially since it is a preferential ballot. And as
Mhm.
long as people rank it at least number two or three on their ballots, then it could just go all the way without winning anything else. Although it would be very, 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 as you said, chaotic.
Right, and it's interesting you bring that point up because even if Honora were to lose it's all of its categories except for picture. It's a strong number two in every single category. It would be number two for actress. It would be number two for director, number two for editing, probably number two for screenplay. So that's such a fascinating position for this film to be in, where even when it loses something, it was probably right there on the edge.
Yeah, and I don't really see a lot of people putting it at the bottom there either. I can see
Yeah.
people putting Amelia Perez at the very bottom. I could even see people putting The Brutalist at the very bottom just because it is a very long film that's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But I don't see a lot of people putting Nora in their bottom five.
hmm so going back to our BAFTA winners, so we had Conclave win for Outstanding British Film. We had the Outstanding Debut by a British writer, director, producer went to Kneecap, a film that I loved. And then we had Film Not in an English Language go to Amelia Perez. I think we're talking about how many Oscars is Amelia Perez going to win? I think we're looking at three. I think we're looking at Saldana. I think non-English language international film is locked, and I still think it's winning song. It's won song everywhere so far. Now, granted, the Guild for Songwriters and Lyricists did, announce their winners, and it did not win there. Diane Warren won there, which is really interesting. But I just think El Mal, I just think it's still going to win, especially because El Mal is Zoe Saldana's kind of big moment. And I feel like if you're voting for her and you like her performance and you say, I'm going to support this performance outside of the film and support this actress, it just makes sense that El Mal kind of goes along with that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's still pretty safe to win song, especially since I think Elmo, it's the most iconic part of the film. It's the one part of the film where a lot of people are very split on the musical numbers, but a lot of people think that is the one portion of the movie where it really comes alive. And at this point, I don't see them giving an Oscar to Diane Warren, especially for a film that not a lot of people have bothered to watch, and a lot of people haven't even, been able to remember a lyric from the song, where at the very least,
Yeah,
remember one thing from El Mal, it's Zoe Saldana's performance. Now, will
right.
it win? Now, will Amelia Perez win three Oscars? I think that you're right. I think it will, but let's consider the possibility that I'm Still Here wins, because we're kind of in uncharted waters, because several international films have been nominated for Best Picture and Best International Feature. but we've never had two nominated in
Mhm.
international and in Best Picture. Even last year, when Anatomy of the Fall and Zone of Interest were both in picture, only one of them was in international. So
Mhm.
it's entirely possible that I'm Still Here could pull it off. At least that's what Brazil and all the internet will have people believe. For me to really predict Still Here, I really needed to see it win at BAFTA because maybe the controversy doesn't make as big of a deal to BAFTA as it will to some Oscar voters, but let's not forget that the Academy is getting more and more international every year. And the more international you get, the more resigned you might be to some of the controversy surrounding Amelia Perez. But there is a lot of passion for I'm Still Here. And if it were to win Best International Feature, I almost feel like it would be the equivalent to Coda winning Best Picture over Power of the Dog, or even Moonlight winning Best Picture over La La Land, which kind of had a backlash at the 11th hour. People really love that film, and the Best Actress nomination for Fernanda Torres bodes well, but if it couldn't even get into Best Original Screenplay, I don't know. So
Yeah.
as of now, I'm still predicting three awards for Amelia Perez, but
Mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's just two.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Still Here is a very like we're talking about, Madison being right on the heels of more or vice versa. I think it's the same for international. I just think to your point, if I'm Still Here was a stronger film, it would have gotten that screenplay nomination perhaps. But, if Torres, just to kind of argue the I'm Still Here thing, if you don't feel like she's gonna win, or if you don't feel like you can vote for her because there are two other or three other four of her whatever performances, like this would be a way to honor her. And she has been everywhere. I mean, I don't think she was not nominated at BAFTA and she still went. She has been such an excellent campaigner for this film, and I could see it. I could see them wanting to honor her in this way and wanting to honor the film. And to your point, I mean, all of the internet Brazil one, I would love to see that happen. I would love to see the celebrations in Brazil. Um, if I'm Still Here were to win, I just, I just, Amelia Perez would have had to lose somewhere in terms of this category, and it just hasn't lost. It just keeps winning. So I don't really, yeah, I can't predict it. I've seen again those Oscar prognosticators are switching, but I still think it's gonna pull through. I don't think the controversy is gonna be enough to stop it here. But
Yeah. Yeah, going back to the Coda comparison I made, when that got nominated for Best Picture, nobody was predicting it for the win. And to be fair, Coda won at least a couple of awards going into the Oscars. It won SAG, and that really kind of got it started. I'm Still Here hasn't had that moment, although I do think, like Coda, more and more people are discovering I'm Still Here since it got the nomination. Before, maybe people would have skipped it and they would have just resigned themselves to checking off Amelia Perez because it was the most popular film in that category. And I do think that some Oscar voters, maybe they'll watch one international film, maybe two, but they won't necessarily watch them all, which hurts a great film like The Girl with the Needle. See the there, but if anything, but if you're going to like watch just two, it's going to be the ones nominated for Best Picture. And if they watch Amelia Perez and I'm Still Here, they may say, "Oh, Amelia Perez isn't as good as this. Let's vote with our hearts."
absolutely, I agree. I think if I'm Still Here would have won at BAFTA, I would have 100% switched because I would have said the momentum is, but that loss, I think it just speaks to where the voters are, and the fact that, yeah, okay, we're not going to award it in these other categories that maybe we were originally thinking about, but we still like the film enough to give it this win. And keep in mind, if it were to win an international feature, it doesn't go to the director, it's just for the country and the film, so you're not really awarding a particular individual necessarily, which could be kind of a consolation to people that are like, hey, I feel uncomfortable about some of the things that have been said, but I still like this movie and I can still award the film in some. I don't know if that makes sense, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying because if you think about it, all of Brazil is rallying around I'm Still Here. Everyone loves it. And you don't see Mexico rallying behind Amelia Perez. If anything, there's kind
Right.
of been backlash from people saying that it's not a proper representation of Mexico. and
Right.
that and technically it's not. I don't think it's the Mexican submission. I think that it's the French submission, if I'm not
It is. It's
mistaken.
the submission from France. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still representing Mexico. And I feel like going into the Oscars, a lot of people said that they wanted a timely film that was going to say something about what's going on in the world right now. And Amelia Perez seemed to fit that definition. It was commenting on Mexico, and right now, deportations are being kicked into overdrive. It was commenting on trans rights, which is also at jeopardy. And on paper, it sounds like, a good way, to stick it to the White House. But the more and more people have been analyzing some of the film's themes, it might not be, the best, it might not be saying what they think they're saying, is what I'm saying.
No, I completely agree with you. I think if we're talking about quality and what we want to win, I would pick the seat of the sacred fig personally. But I just think again, Amelia Perez needed to lose this category somewhere for me to think that people, now granted, I don't know. Like I said, I think I'm still here. They've done such a good job of being everywhere and showing up. But to go back to Diane Warren, she's also done an excellent job of that. And that's not always enough. So I'm sticking with Amelia Perez in international feature, and I'm sticking with El Mal for now, which would be a win for Odiard as well. Interesting there, if he were to win that category. So another category that has been could potentially, Nick, be our nail biter of Oscar Sunday is documentary feature, because at BAFTA you had two of the Academy Award nominees in the category, which was Black Box Diary and No Other Land, and Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, ended up winning, which was not nominated at the Oscars. And this is so tricky because I've been with No Other Land and I've kept it in my number one spot, but it hasn't won anything going into Oscar Sunday. And I do believe maybe the right people have seen it, but I think the fact that it did not have a US distributor for so long has maybe been enough to stop it. I don't know. What are you thinking about documentary? Because I'm really, again, this was another BAFTA shocker for me when I saw the results, was to see, that the Superman film won, because I would have felt if No Other Land was going to lose, it would have gone to Black Box Diaries or even Daughters, perhaps. I was really surprised, especially because if you think about it, Christopher Reeve is an American icon. So I would have felt like the British voting body was not as connected to that story. I was just floored. It was one of those, my jaw was truly like, I was really, really, probably, to be honest with you, this was actually the BAFTA category that surprised me the most.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that Superman is a global icon, but I definitely hear what you're saying. And
Yeah.
all season long, I've been waiting for No Other Land to win, something major to justify me having it in my number one spot at the Oscars, and it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't. That said, Superman has pretty much been winning in all the places where you think that, another front runner might emerge. And if that film had been nominated for Best Picture, I mean Best Director at the Oscars, then I mean sorry, Best Documentary at the Oscars, then who's to say that it wouldn't be, the front runner to win? So I don't think that it really is a front runner right now, which I think bodes well for No Land, which has at the very least gotten a few critics' prizes. But if we're looking at films that have actually won something, there's Porson the Moor, which is also dealing with a very timely subject matter and won
Mm-hmm.
DGA. Although it wasn't nominated at BAFTA, so we wouldn't know how it would fare against No Land, or even Black Box Diaries, as you mentioned, because that film is also touching on a very, timely subject, and it's approached in a way that a lot of people might not expect. And, I could see any three of those films winning, and since we haven't seen a true frontrunner emerge, I think I'm just going to stick with No Other Land to the very end, because I do think that the passion behind that film will carry it, across the finish line. But if it goes to Porcelain War or Black Box Diaries, it won't come as a surprise at all.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, yeah, I agree with everything you said. It wouldn't be a surprise, and I may just stick with No Other Land just all the way through. And if I lose that category, I lose, that prediction, and I get it wrong. But so I think, what would our alternative be? I think Porcelain, where I currently have it in number two, and that does make sense as an alternative. Um, but maybe the lack of an alternative, as you said, does bode well for No Other Land. I would have liked to see it win some. I'm just shocked. I don't know.
Yeah, but the fact that Superman has been winning pretty much everything, that does, I do think bode well for Netherland because if you took Superman out of the race, maybe No Other Land would have been second there, but then again, maybe it wouldn't have.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
could still be Black Box Diaries too. I'm very close to putting that in my number two, but I'm sticking with Force of War at number two just because it does have a GGA on its side.
Yeah, that's what I have as well. So animated film was another category that and this is your category, but another category that I sort of still have a question mark, a little bit of a question mark as to whether or not Flow could win here. And I was hoping that BAFTA may provide clarity as it did last year when The Boy and the Heron won at BAFTA, but they gave both animated film and children's and family film to Wallace and Gromit. So being the animation expert that you are, how do you feel about this category? Do you think that the Wild Robot is going to, it did very well with the Animation Guild, but do you think that that's just going to come through, or do we think that Flow has a genuine shot here, given that it is double nominated in animated and international feature?
Well, I do think that Flo definitely has a shot, but I think that the Wild Robot also has a great shot. And let's not count out Wallace and Gromit. It's easy to write that off as a British thing, and technically it hasn't won anything else this season. But you look back to when they first introduced the animated feature categories at BAFTA, Happy Feet won there, while Cars won pretty much everything else. Cars won at the Annie Awards. It won the Golden Globe. It won PGA. Everyone assumed that Cars was going to win. And then lo and behold, it wins the Oscar. And what do Wallace and Gromit and Happy Feet both have in common? They both have a penguin in it. Coincidence? Yeah, probably. But if it does win, we know why. That said, I do think the race is between Flo and Wild Robot. And after Flo won at Golden Globe, I was waiting to see if it win at BAFTA because I told myself, well, Wild Robot, it's still going to win at CCA, it's still going to win PGA, and it'll still probably win all the Annie Awards. And like at the Annies, it should be noted that they're in separate categories. Like Flow was an independent feature, and then it didn't, go up against Wild Robot, so that didn't do a ton to help us, but it did definitely show that Wild Robot was beloved in the animation community. But so was Spider Verse, which also won all of those awards except for BAFTA and Golden Globe. And at the BAFTAs, I was waiting to see if Flow would prevail there, but since it went to Wallace and Gromit, I think that bodes well for Wild Robot even though it doesn't have Golden Globe or BAFTA, it's not out of the question for it to still win the Oscar because Toy Story 4 didn't win the Globe or BAFTA, but went on to win. And Big Hero 6, which also has a level of robot at its core, it didn't win BAFTA, didn't win Golden Globe. It really didn't win anything that season leading up to it winning the Oscar. That was a very different year because it was the Lego movie that was dominating everywhere pretty much for the most part. And maybe Big Hero 6 would have won more awards and not for that. But even then, it would have been a close race between Big Hero 6 and How to Train Your Dragon 2. So I still think that Wild Robot is the one. It's still pretty firmly the front runner in that category, but Flo and even Wallace and Gromit aren't too far behind. Although I really hope that Wild Robot does win because it's my personal favorite film of the year, animated or live action. And Chris Sanders is long overdue. And if you've listened to any of his speeches at the Annie Awards, you see that, he's just been in this industry for so long. And in any other year, he would have won an Oscar for Lilo and Stitch if that didn't have to go up against Spirited Away. He would have won an Oscar for How to Train Your Dragon if not for Toy Story 3. It's really his time, and I have every confidence that he'll continue to make good films, but I can't imagine a better time to award him than now.
I love that you said that The Wild Robot is your favorite film of the year. I love The Wild Robot. I would be very happy to see it win. And we should mention it does have the score nomination for Chris Bowers and a sound nomination, so that does show sort of
Well,
broader
actually,
base of support.
yeah, did you say
Go ahead.
song? Because it's not in song, but it's in sound.
Sound, right, sound. Um, but yeah, I just wonder, Flow, I think, has such a good narrative, and as we're talking about how much narratives matter, there's a lot of filmmakers that have sort of come out in support of Flow and are encouraging people to see it. And regardless of whether it wins the Oscar or not, it's had such an incredible year. It's done so much for Latvia and their film community and the animation community as a whole, as you would be able to tell me, but better than I could. But I just wonder if I think it's close. I think you're correct that The Wild Robot is going to win, and Chris Sanders. This is his fourth nomination now. He is overdue, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all, and I would be delighted for Flo. And I wonder, to your point, is there a world where Flo and The Wild Robot split, and Wallace and Gromit comes up the middle?
Yeah, I think that all three of those are possible scenarios, although it would be something of surprise. Although, keep in mind, Wallace and Gromit, they've only lost in this category two times. Like, they've lost twice in the history of the franchise. Like, the original Grand Day Out lost to Creature Comforts, which was also Nick Park, and then A Matter of Loaf and Death lost to it lost to another short that year, the one with all the like characters from different like advertisements. So it's not like impossible to beat Nick Park, but it wouldn't be that surprising because the Academy are creatures of habit.
Mm-hmm. So as you mentioned, Honora did win casting, which bodes well. The Brutalist won in cinematography for Lowell Crowley. I think that's, in my opinion, a safe bet for the Oscars as well. What do you think about those two categories?
Yeah, I think that you're right. They're pretty much set, and if you're if we're ranking the Oscar nominations from the most to least likely, I say that they're probably the safest, along with a couple others that we'll get to in a minute that are both below the
Oh,
lines.
right. Which brings us to editing. Editing is such a fascinating category, has been all season. So we have kind of a Sean Baker and Conclave, going head to head with Nick Emerson from Conclave. You had Dune Part 2 and Amelia Perez there as well, and then Kneecap, which was not nominated at the Oscars. And then you have Conclave kind of emerging as the winner here. I'm also predicting Conclave at the Oscars. I think there's clearly a lot of love for that film. It is very well edited, and I don't know, it just makes sense. But I mean, I know historically there is a strong tie between editing and Best Picture, but we've seen that correlation become less and less. That stat, I guess I should say, is becoming less and less strong as the years go on. So yeah, I'm sticking with Nick Emerson for Conclave in editing, but I wonder, that is kind of, it feels like it's becoming a little bit clearer, shall we say, but it definitely not a lock like something like, The Brutalist.
Yeah, and like you said, it doesn't line up as much as, between picture and editing as it used to in the past, which is why I think that Conclave can win the Oscar for editing, even if it doesn't necessarily go on to win Best Picture there. And it's been a very confusing season for editing because we were initially looking to CCA to see if that might point us in the right direction. And then Challengers won there, a very deserved win. It should have been at the Oscars too, but it didn't do anything to help us. The same can be said about John M. Chu winning Best Director at CCA. And unfortunately, we're not going to have the Ace Eddies to point us in the right direction either, because that happens after the Oscars. Although, even if they did take place before the Oscars, Honora's in one category at Ace, then Conclave's in another. And if those are your two front runners, well, it's not going to help us. I'm also sticking with Conclave for now just because it does have the BAFTA win. And yeah, it is a very well edited movie. But be on the lookout for surprise there too. Like when I
Yeah.
said at the top of this, podcast that there were like 10 categories I wasn't sure about, editing was one of them, even though I do feel confident enough to predict Conclave without changing my, prediction going forward.
I feel like I'm very much in the same position of like, I feel good about this, good enough to want to not change it, but if it goes a different way, I would just say, okay, that makes complete sense. Now I'm gonna get to a stretch of categories at BAFTA that I think are gonna match strongly with Oscar. You let me know if you disagree, Nick. First, we have costume design, which went to Wicked. I think that's very safe in Wicked's camp for the Oscars as well. Then we have hair and makeup, the substance, which, as you mentioned, Nick, earlier in the year, I think we were all in a position of, if this film gets nothing, can it please just get hair and makeup? And obviously, it went far and beyond what we were dreaming or hoping for this film. But I think hair and makeup has sort of been a lock for this film all season, and it won at BAFTA. And then original score for The Brutalist, Daniel Blumberg. I think that's going to be an Oscar repeat. And then we have production design that went to Wicked, the great Nathan Crowley, much beloved production designer, could finally be getting his first win for Wicked this year. What do you think about those categories, Nick?
Yeah, I think that those are probably the safest categories the entire night, and quite frankly, they've been pretty safe for months now. I think that the minute the trailers for Wicked hit, we all say, okay, however this movie turns out, it's going to win Best Production Design and Costumes, and there was a point where I thought it could win Makeup too, and the fact that it didn't win at BAFTA, I think, pretty much makes the substance the front runner there. And for a while, Score was also giving me pause, but with its BAFTA win and also at the Golden Globes, I think that The Brutalist is going to win there too. So at the very least, The Brutalist is going to win 2 Oscars, I think.
Yeah, I think at this point, what I have for The Brutalist, I have Score, I have Brody, and I have cinematography. So I think it's going to be 3
Yeah.
that are, I would say, pretty safe bets, which is wild because there was a world where I thought we're looking at 5+, but I think those 3 feel pretty safe. You have made a very strong argument for Corbet today that I will think about, but I don't know if I'm brave enough to switch. Now going to a category that I am not confident about at all, which is Best Sound, is a category even through nominations and now to the win that I've just been really struggling with. We have Dune Part 2 winning here, up against Gladiator, which I currently have as the winner, but I'm so tempted to switch just because I think Dune Part 2 makes so much sense here because there's so many musical film or musical adjacent films that are in this
Okay.
category. Go ahead.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I thought that Gladiator 2 didn't get nominated for sound at the Oscars.
No, I'm talking
sure
about
that
in terms of BAFTA that it was up against Gladiator. Let me,
Oh,
yeah.
oh,
Let
I
me
thought you were
double
talking.
check. No, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I think Dune Part 2, and I was in Variety, Clayton Davis made a great point of it's a good comparison to the second Lord of the Rings film, which didn't really do well in terms of nominations or wins, but it still managed to pick up sound. But I think in terms of the Oscars, having Wicked, A Complete Unknown, and Amelia Perez all in sound, potentially pulling apart that sort of musical thing that they like, it just makes sense that Dune Part 2 would come up the middle, because as much as I love that Wild Robot nomination in sound, I don't think it's actually going to happen. I think it's one of those things where the nomination is the win. So yeah, I don't know. I just had Wicked in this for so long, and I think if we're looking at Wicked doing really well in terms of the crafts, it makes sense that it also gets sound. But this is really giving me pause in this category. What do you think?
Yeah, I've been predicting Dune Part 2 for the longest time, and I feel like the BAFTAs only vindicated that because, like you said, we have 3 musical films in the mix there, and if we only had 1 or 2, I'd say maybe one of them could come up. But if you're going to choose between Amelia Perez, A Complete Unknown, or Wicked, like they're all musicals, and I don't know how well, a lot of voters even understand how sound works in movies. So why would you vote for one but not the other? I think that, you're going to look at Dune and say, that's, an action movie. It's a sci-fi movie. So let's, check that off. And like you said, it would be cool to see Wild Robot win here, but animation historically hasn't had the best track record in sound. It's got many nominations over the years, but I think the last one to actually win in this category was The Incredibles. And even then, it was back when the sound categories were split up, and I think that it was just Incredibles and 1 or 2 other films in the race. So it's a completely different field. So I think that this one is pretty safe for Dune, and it will pull a Two Towers. And we'll see if Messiah can pull Return of the King.
Yeah. No, I think that's it. And, we should mention Best Visual Effects, which has long been predicted to go to Dune, won at BAFTA as well. So it makes sense to pair sound and visual effects as sort of a tech achievement for the film and celebrate the film that way. So yeah, I think you've convinced me to make the switch. And just to close out our BAFTA winners, Wander to Wonder won British Best Animated Short Film, British Short Animation Film, which I think will repeat at the Oscars. Do you agree, Nick, that Wander to Wonder, that's such a hard thing for me to say. Wander to Wonder is going to be the best animated short film.
Yeah, of all the short categories, I think that doc and live action can go in any number of directions, but I'm pretty confident that Wonder to Wonder is going to win in animation because I've seen all five, and that one's my personal favorite. I also would love to see Magic Candies win there, especially since it would mean a win for one of the directors of Dragon Ball Z. But
Mhm.
I think that Wonder to Wonder, it's the most whimsical, it's the most inventive, and in addition to the BAFTA, it also won an Annie Award not too long ago. And yeah, I think that, shorts are going to make or break your Oscar pool. And of all the three, that one's the safest one at this point.
I completely agree. And just to round out our BAFTA winners, we had Rock, Paper, Scissors for British short film. I guess the live action film. I haven't seen it, but I will definitely check it out. I love watching the shorts. And then the voted by the public, the E Rising Star Award went to David Johnson, a young actor that I really like. So excited to see him win there. Any other thoughts on BAFTA, Nick?
Yeah, what I can say is that we went into BAFTA hoping that it was going to clear everything up. And instead, I think it's made this award season more confusing as ever. And in a way, I kind of admire that. But as someone who wants to win my Oscar pool, I also can't help but be a little frustrated, which kind of seems like the case every year.
So we sort of started talking about how many categories are up in the air. I think for me, the most up in the air would probably be screenplay, actress, and doc. Do you think those are the three? Are there others that are become head scratchers for you?
Yeah, well, like I said, I do think that animation is a bit of a head scratcher because even though Wild Robot does seem to have reclaimed its frontrunner status, it still doesn't have those two crucial, not necessarily crucial, but awards that really will help it go the distance. So that's up in the air. And I do think that Best Director is a lot closer than some people are giving it credit for because even though that Sean Baker won DGA and that has a good track record, let's not forget that, Bong Joon-ho didn't win at DGA either. That went to Sam Mendes,
Mhm.
although at the end, Parasite did go on to win Best Picture anyway. So that's not the best comparison necessarily. But even though DGA does have the better track record, I'd still feel that Corbett can easily win Best Director.
I'm curious, what are your other categories that you are maybe feeling okay about, but not 100%? We mentioned we got some locks, but what are some?
Well, like you said, editing is one for sure. After BAFTA, I
Mhm.
would feel comfortable predicting Conclave to win there, but it's not a done deal by any means. And who knows, maybe they will go for Sean Baker in that category instead, and that'll be the ultimate sign that Honora is going to win Best Picture.
Yeah, and you mentioned the shorts being the make or break for the Oscar poll. I'm just curious because those are the only two other categories we haven't discussed at all in terms of Oscar. So I do have Wonder to Wonder for animation short, and then I have The Man Who Could Not Remain Silent for best live action short film. But I'm so tempted to switch to Anuja just because that's on Netflix. It's easily accessible to people. And then for documentary short subject, I have Incident. I wonder what you have for those other short categories.
Yeah, right now, a lot of people are saying that The Man Who Could Not Remain Silent is going to live action short, and it could definitely happen, but I don't really see it because in order to fully understand that film, at least if you're, American Academy voter, chances are you're going to have to look up on Wikipedia what exactly it means because it doesn't really clue you into what's going on in the short, and it doesn't tell you what happened after. And when you know the whole story, it does leave a real impact. But if you just watch it on your own, I'm not sure that people are going to understand it. It could be a Nuja. I also really like I'm Not a Robot, which has a very creative premise. And from what I understand, it's actually going to be a feature film at some point down the line. There have been
Mm.
talks about that. But I think it's going to be Alien that wins because it's a very intense short and it touches upon a very timely subject matter dealing with immigration. And I do think that they don't always necessarily go for, the timely shorts. Like, just the other year, Wes Anderson won beating out the short that was, dealing with, Red, White, and Blue, which dealt with, the inability to get an abortion in the United States. So
Mhm.
they don't always go with the most relevant short, but I do think that in a year like this where we don't have a Wes Anderson, that Alien could come out on top. And in Doc Short, I would love for it to be Incident. I think that's the most, inventive documentary. I think it's the one that takes the most risk. I think it's the one that, really, triggers, a rethinking of what a documentary could be. But I also think that's why it might not necessarily win there because I feel like a lot of Academy voters are basic and they might just look at this and say, oh, this is weird. I don't get it. It's confusing. So I think that they could go for I Am Ready Warden, which is also touching upon a very important subject matter, a very divisive subject matter, but it does it in a way that's not necessarily saying one thing is right and one thing is wrong. It just shows people reacting to a very, controversial thing. So I feel like they could go for that. But if they want to feel good, they could go for The Only Girl in the Orchestra. It's on Netflix. It's a feel-good
Yeah.
doc, and it stands out from I Am Ready Warren and Incident, and also Death by Numbers, which isn't an easy watch. But the one thing that gives me pause there is that it's kind of similarly themed to Instruments of a Beating Heart, which is also about, a young, orchestra player. So why would you go with one music doc over the other? So that's why I'm
Yeah.
currently predicting I Am Ready Warden to win there. But I would like for
I
it to be
have
instant.
Yeah, I have I'm Ready Warden in my number 2, and I very well switched them in my 2 weeks or that I have left to think about it. And I love Alien. I think it's fantastic. Of all the shorts, it's probably just my favorite of the 15 in general. It really moved me, but I don't know if that's enough. But you make a good point about The Man Who Could Not Remain Silent not necessarily providing the context that it needs. I was still very moved by it, and I think there's a timeliness to it, even if you don't know the context. I feel like the idea of sort of being in a situation where you see something wrong that's happening and you want to step up for somebody. I think we can all relate to that. Uh, but I, but you've given me a lot to think about in this episode in general, Nick. Um, are there other categories that we've touched on all 23 here, but anything we need to dig in further?
Yeah, I think that we've touched upon all the main ones. And just to go back to the one that's probably the one that I'm probably the most in the middle on is probably international feature because it just makes sense to predict Emilio Perez. I don't think I'm going to change my mind, but I'm just not going to shake the feeling that I'm still here isn't going to do it. And if you want to do one no guts, no glory, prediction this year, that might be it.
Mm. That's a good point of in terms of no guts, no glory. I wonder what mine would. I haven't really thought about it. Mine would probably be switching for song, but I just don't know what the other song would be because I'm not gonna predict Diane Warren, and I don't feel like I don't know what the other mine. You know what? I changed my mind. My no guts, no glory would be the substance and screenplay. Just because the substance winning screenplay makes so much sense to me. Of they clearly like that movie enough for it to get a best picture nomination and director and actress and makeup. So I know they want to I feel like they want to, give Coralie Farshad something, and I thought her CCA speech was fantastic. And so I just wonder if she's been, everywhere with Demi. So and if I'm gonna stick with my guts and just keep more in number 1, like if I feel like her passion is strong enough to move against the stats of like she's not gonna be in the best picture winner, it makes sense then that the screenplay would go along with Demi. Like screenplay, actress, makeup is a great sort of 3 punch.
Yeah, it could definitely happen there. And I go back and forth on whether or not she could win there because, like we said, it's definitely the most original of the bunch. I don't know if it's as strong as in terms of dialogue, which might hurt it compared to A Real Pain or Nora, although it is full of memorable lines that people still repeat, which might be more than enough for it to win. And I think that also really helped Get Out win back then too. But yeah, it could win three. I'm just really torn on on exactly how many Nora's going to win if it does win Best Picture. Because if it doesn't win in screenplay and it doesn't win in actress or editing and director, the places where it does win and completes a trifecta, or does it just win two, or does it just win one?
Yeah.
Or am I just completely off base predicting it to win Best Picture at all?
I mean, I think Honora is pretty set in picture. But I mean, a Conclave win at this point doesn't seem completely crazy to me.
Yeah, I feel like it's really come down to just those two in Best Picture, with maybe The Brutalist the very distant third. Now
Yeah,
watch it go to Wicked.
yeah. Um, no, I think you're right. I think see this is Nick. This always happens to me. I bring a guest onto this podcast hoping that they would say something completely outlandish, but then we end up agreeing more than I would like, which is good, I guess. But then I'm like, are we both just wrong? But I mean, I do think, yeah, I think Honora, and as much as you've given me food for thought in terms of Brady Corbet, and I genuinely, in terms of what I would like, if I'm saying what I would like to win, I would like to see Brady Corbet win, and I would like to see Demi Moore win, even if I have to move away from those predictions. That's what I would like to see happen. But
Yeah. And if they do really want to spread the love, I do think that Best Director is the place to award, The Brutalist. And just remember that
absolutely,
he's in four categories, and if just one of them were Best Picture, just remember it doesn't hurt to spread the love, people.
absolutely, yeah. And speaking of Nick, I've been on my Sing Sing train all season long. I've advocated for Coleman Domingo. I love, like, if I could give an Oscar to anybody this year, it's not going to happen, but it would be Coleman Domingo for Sing Sing. I love that performance. What about you? If you could just give an Oscar to one of the nominees, who would it be? What category would it be?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I do think that Colm Domingo is the best actor contender, and in the perfect world, I would love to see him win. But at this point, I'm just kind of relieved that he got nominated, and how Sing Sing
Yeah, yeah.
didn't do as well as it could have. Now, I'm really tempted to go with someone in Best Actor because Mikey Madison is my favorite performance of the year. But like we mentioned earlier, I would love to see Demi Moore win. I'd love to see Fernanda Torres win. And even in some of the supporting categories, a lot of, Kieran Culkin is my favorite there too. So I'll be happy for him. And even in Best Supporting Actress, I actually really like Zoe Saldana and Amelia Perez. Say about what you will about the film itself, but I will be happy for her. But I'd also be very happy for Ariana Grande. And
Mm.
I guess, if I had to give an Oscar to one thing, since I'm an animation guy and Wild Robot was my favorite movie of the year, I'm going to say Best Animated Feature Wild Robot.
That's what I thought. That I was waiting for you to say that. I was surprised. You took me there. You took me on a loop there. Um,
I took you on a
Nick, you took me on a journey, which I very much appreciate. What have you sort of maybe caught up with something Oscar-wise or non-Oscar-wise that you just enjoyed? A recommendation for folks out there. You mentioned Chicken for Linda earlier. What else have you loved? Could again be in the Oscar conversation or not.
Yeah, I caught up with pretty much everything going into this awards season. Since I vote with a couple different groups, I was pretty, good about watching everything going in. And a lot of my favorite films did ultimately make it into the race. But just to think of a few others off the top of my head, Sing Sing, of course, I feel should have been in the Best Picture category. And it should have been in Best Supporting Actor too, although at the very least, Clarence Macklin did get that screenplay nomination, which is, not nothing. If it's more than not nothing, it's great. And we can finally, and it's good to just know that we can call him Academy Award nominee Clarence Macklin, even if
I
he
knew there
should
was a
be.
reason. I knew there was a reason I invited you here. I knew I made a good choice. Thank you.
Yeah, and in terms of movies that, completely blanked, there's challengers, of course. The internet's favorite movie that didn't get any love. It should have been in score, should have been in, editing too. Would have been great to see it in cinematography, but it just didn't happen. And another film that hasn't gotten nearly as much love as it should have is $3. In that film, you could have nominated all three daughters and it would have
Mhm.
been, a great best supporting actress lineup. But if you're just going to do one, I say go with Natasha Lyonne. But everyone I talk to, they usually have a different favorite from that movie, which is probably why it didn't get nominated there. But it should have been in screenplay at the very least.
It did not get nominated because Netflix just dropped the ball and dumped it and moved on to other things, which is a shame because, as you mentioned, the screenplay. I understand the actress is not like I liked the performances, but no, I didn't have one that really stood out to me that I felt like maybe should have been in the conversation more than the others, but the screenplay is very good. Definitely recommend people watching it on Netflix if you haven't yet. Nick, where can people find you on social media? You mentioned your book. Do you have a release date for the book, or a place where people can be on the lookout for it?
Yeah, we're planning to release it sometime this year. We don't have a precise date locked in yet, but if you stay on my socials, I'm Nick Spake everywhere and NSpake on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it these days. And there will be more updates coming up in the book. We're in the final stages right now, and the book is actually going to be released in a couple different volumes. I wrote it as one, but due to its length and how much it covers, we're going to release it in a few. But it's called Bright and Shiny, a history of animation awards. And if you're a fan of animation awards and everything between, it's going to have everything you've ever wanted to know about both topics.
Cool. Well, definitely keep me updated. Let me know when you do have a release date, and I'll mention it on the pod. And just buy it for myself. I'm really excited. Any final thoughts, Nick, before I let you go?
Yeah, just that if Honora wins at SAG, it's going to go all the way to the Oscars. And at that point, it's just a question of what other awards does Honora win on Oscar night?
That is, I completely agree. Nick, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for giving me a chunk of your Tuesday, a chunk of your evening. It was really fun to meet you and get to know a little bit more about your work and your Oscar hot takes for the season.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I've always been a fan of the pod, and it's great to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, you're more than welcome to come back anytime. Just let me know when you're free, and I would love to have you. But everyone, thank you for listening. I am Shadan Larkey. I'm at Shadan Larkey everywhere. Please follow Chasing the Gold. Well, not follow Chasing the Gold. Follow In Session Film, where you can find more Chasing the Gold content. I have an incredible team of writers that are writing all about award season and are working on their own final predictions that you can check out on the website. So go to InSessionFilm.com to see their writing, my full Oscar predictions that will be updated probably up until the day of the Oscars. To be honest with you, you can find them on there. And follow the In Session Film podcast, rate us, review us. We have merch that you can purchase if you feel so inclined. If you forgot Valentine's Day and you have a secret Valentine, I think In Session Film merch would be a fantastic gift for any occasion personally. But thank you as always for the support, and don't forget to rate and review, tell your friends, leave a comment. We got some great comments on the last podcast, and it was fun to get to engage. And I read them all, and I welcome them all, and I'm grateful for all of them. So I think that about wraps it up, and have a great evening, everybody. Nick, again, thank you so much.